It was a crisp Monday morning in San Diego, California, and Samuel Adams was seated at his sleek, modern office, awaiting an important client. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the stylish decor of his interior design company. Samuel, a successful businessman at 42, had built his career from the ground up. His design firm had grown exponentially over the past few years, and he was widely respected in his field. Today he was preparing to discuss a major renovation project in Los Angeles with a high-profile client, one that could take his business to even greater heights. His life seemed to be the picture of success. Samuel was married to Kimberly, a 39-year-old nutritionist who worked at a prestigious health clinic. Kimberly was the picture of grace and intelligence, and together they made an impressive couple. They had 2 children, Ben, a bright and energetic 10-year-old who loved video games, and Lily, an 8-year-old with a passion for dance. Their home was filled with laughter and love, and Samuel often marveled at how everything seemed to fall perfectly into place. But recently, something had shifted in their relationship. Though they still shared a home and responsibilities, Samuel had begun to notice a growing emotional distance between him and Kimberly. They no longer shared the same warmth and closeness that had once defined their marriage. Conversations had become shorter, their interactions more strained, and Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had tried to brush it off, telling himself it was just a rough patch, but deep down he knew something was wrong. The weight of this uncertainty lingered in his mind as he sat in his office that morning. He had always prided himself on being a devoted husband and father, yet he couldn't help but wonder if Kimberly still felt the same way about him. He had tried to discuss it with her several times, but each attempt had ended in vague excuses and distractions. It was as if she too could sense the distance but was unwilling to address it. Samuel glanced at the clock on his desk, then at his phone. He had made a point to schedule the meeting with his client early, hoping to finish up quickly and head home for the evening. Tonight he planned to spend time with his family, something he had been trying to do more often. Ben had been asking him to play video games with him, and Lily had been practicing a new dance routine that she was eager to show him. Samuel was determined to make up for the time he'd been spending away from them. He finished his coffee and reviewed the project details one last time, but his mind kept drifting back to Kimberly. He thought about how much he still loved her, how much he wanted their marriage to work. He remembered the early days of their relationship when they couldn't seem to get enough of each other, when they were each other's best friend and confidant. Those memories felt distant now, like a dream he was struggling to hold on to. As Samuel's thoughts wandered, the phone on his desk rang. He quickly snapped out of his reverie and picked up the receiver. It was the client, ready to discuss the upcoming project. Samuel focused on the conversation, using all his professional skills to steer the discussion and finalize the details. As the call drew to a close, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He had successfully handled another high-stakes meeting. With the business side of things settled, Samuel felt a surge of anticipation. He could finally go home and reconnect with his family. He quickly packed up his things, sent a few emails, and made his way out of the office, eager to start his evening. As he walked through the parking lot, he pulled out his phone to check the time. It was almost 6:30 p.m. He could make it home in time for dinner. But as soon as he started his car, his phone rang again. This time, it was a call from one of his project managers, asking for urgent changes to a design plan. Samuel sighed, feeling a twinge of frustration. He didn't want to stay late at the office, but the changes were important, and he knew it would take just a few more minutes. He reluctantly parked the car and returned to his desk. As he spoke with the project manager, his phone beeped with an incoming call. It was from Kimberly. Samuel, already in the middle of the conversation, decided to quickly take the call, thinking he could multitask. When he answered, the line was quiet for a moment, but then he heard Kimberly's voice. She was laughing, genuinely, and it sounded different. It was a sound that didn't sit right with Samuel, a sound he hadn't heard from her in a long time. The laughter wasn't the light, easy giggle that he was used to. It was deeper, warmer, and more intimate. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. Then, to his surprise, a man's voice followed Kimberly's laughter. "Lock the door," the man said in a low, almost whispered tone. Samuel froze. It felt as if the floor had dropped out beneath him. His mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of what he had just heard. Was it a mistake? Had he misheard something? The confusion swirled in his chest as the call with his project manager continued, but Samuel's thoughts were elsewhere. Before he could process what had happened, the phone call with Kimberly ended. He immediately hung up on his project manager and sat in stunned silence. His hands gripped the edges of his desk as his heart thudded in his chest. What had just happened? Who was that man? Why did Kimberly sound like that? With his mind racing, Samuel knew one thing for sure. He had to go home. He had to confront Kimberly. Whatever was happening, he had to know the truth. Samuel's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road ahead. His mind replayed the moment he had heard Kimberly's laugh, intimate, soft, and unrecognizable. That voice, the one that had once been a source of comfort, now felt like a foreign sound. The man's voice that followed only added fuel to the fire of suspicion that was rapidly consuming him. Lock the door. Why had she said that? Who was that? Samuel felt his pulse quicken as he turned the key in the ignition, his heart pounding in his chest. The drive home felt like it took forever. He arrived at his house just after 7 p.m. The large, modern house stood in front of him, peaceful and serene in the evening light. But tonight it looked different. It looked cold. There was a strange heaviness in the air, a weight that Samuel couldn't explain. As he walked up the driveway, he noticed the silence. Usually, the sounds of his children playing or Kimberly humming to herself filled the house. But tonight, everything seemed oddly still. Samuel reached for the front door, his hand shaking. He paused, listening intently for any sounds inside. His thoughts raced. What had he heard on that phone call? Was he just imagining things? Or had Kimberly been hiding something from him for months? His gut told him that something wasn't right, but he wasn't prepared for what he was about to find. He opened the door quietly, stepping inside. The familiar smell of fresh coffee and scented candles greeted him, but it didn't bring the comfort it once had. As he slipped off his shoes, the house felt more like a stranger's home than his own. He called out, "Kimberly? Ben? Lily?" There was no response. A low murmur reached his ears from down the hallway, the sound of voices in the distance. One of them clearly Kimberly's, but the other? Samuel frowned. That voice was unfamiliar, and yet somehow it felt hauntingly familiar. It was deep, smooth, and full of casual ease. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. He moved silently through the hallway, trying to keep his breathing steady. As he approached the door to the study, Kimberly's favorite room, he could hear laughter again, but this time, it was more than just a fleeting sound. It was a conversation. The voices seemed close, too close. There was a familiarity in the tone of Kimberly's voice, but it didn't feel like her. There was something else in it, something intimate, something that made Samuel's heart ache. He crept closer, his breath caught in his throat. With each step, the voices grew clearer. Then, just as he was about to turn the corner into the room, a man's voice broke through. "Lock the door." Samuel's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. It was Gregory's. Gregory was a colleague of Kimberly's, a man Samuel had met a few times at social events, always friendly, always a bit too attentive to Kimberly for Samuel's liking. But it had never crossed his mind that there could be anything more to their interactions. Now, standing in the hallway, he realized how wrong he had been. His feet moved of their own accord, bringing him to the door of the study. His heart raced in his chest as he slowly pushed the door open, his hands shaking. And there they were. Kimberly and Gregory. Kimberly was sitting on the leather chair by the desk, a glass of red wine in her hand, smiling at Gregory as he leaned casually against the wall. The way they were positioned, so close, so comfortable with one another, sent a wave of nausea through Samuel. The sight of them together like this was enough to send a surge of anger and betrayal through him. It was real. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Kimberly's eyes widened in shock as she looked up and saw him standing there in the doorway. For a brief moment, her expression flickered with guilt, then quickly shifted to defensiveness. "Samuel," she started, but the words died in her throat as Samuel took a step forward, his eyes fixed on them. Gregory, who had been smirking at something Kimberly had said, froze when he saw Samuel. He didn't speak, but there was an awkwardness in the room that Samuel could feel thickening in the air. "Samuel," Kimberly repeated, standing up quickly, trying to reach out to him, but Samuel held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. His eyes were locked on her, but the words that left his lips felt foreign, as if someone else were speaking them. "How long, Kimberly? How long has this been going on?" Kimberly's face twisted in guilt, her lips trembling. I didn't want you to find out this way." Samuel clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowing. "I heard you, Kimberly. I heard you laughing. I heard him. What did he say to you? Lock the door? Is that how it is now?" Kimberly's face flushed and she bit her lip, not meeting his gaze. Gregory stood there awkwardly, his eyes darting between the two of them, but he said nothing. "I've known for a while," Samuel said, his voice cold. "I've known something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it." His hands balled into fists at his sides, the anger rising within him, but he fought to keep it contained. But this is beyond anything I imagined. Kimberly took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of the situation was finally sinking in. Samuel, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Things have been difficult between us for a while now, and Gregory and we got close. Samuel's stomach twisted. The words stung more than he had anticipated. It wasn't just the betrayal of what he was seeing now, but the truth of it. The truth that Kimberly had allowed herself to fall into the arms of another man. He took a step back, his mind reeling. His hands trembled as he felt his world shift under him, and in that moment, it became clear, this wasn't the life he had worked so hard for. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. Without another word, Samuel turned and walked out of the room, his heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. He didn't look back. The cool night air hit Samuel as he stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind him. His mind was in chaos, a storm of emotions swirling together, anger, hurt, disbelief. He had never imagined his life would unfold like this. The family he had worked so hard to build, the marriage he had invested so much into, was slipping through his fingers like sand. Samuel stood in the driveway, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He could still feel the echoes of Kimberly's voice, her words dripping with guilt as she tried to explain herself. But nothing she said seemed to matter anymore. The trust between them was shattered beyond repair. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The last thing he wanted to do was make rash decisions while he was so consumed by his emotions. He knew that there were kids involved, his children Ben and Lily, and they deserved better than to see their father spiral into despair. But right now he didn't know how to move forward. How could he stay in this house, in this marriage, knowing what he knew? His mind flashed back to the moment when he had heard that voice on the phone, the laughter, the intimacy, the words he would never forget. Lock the door. Those words replayed in his head over and over again, each repetition making his chest tighten. The thought of his wife, the woman he had loved for years, in the arms of another man, someone he knew, felt like a betrayal that cut to the core. Samuel stood there for a long time, lost in thought. The world around him seemed distant, muted, as if he were watching everything through a foggy window. When he finally pulled himself together, he turned and walked back into the house, the door creaking softly as he re-entered. Inside, the silence was almost suffocating. He could hear Kimberly moving around in the study, her voice still audible but too quiet for him to make out the words. Samuel didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear any more excuses, any more justifications for what had happened. It was over. Everything had changed. As he made his way upstairs to the bedroom, he noticed the pictures on the walls. The family vacations, the anniversaries, the moments that once represented a life full of love and happiness. Now they felt like ghosts of a past life. How could it all fall apart so quickly? He sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, trying to steady his breath. The decision he had been avoiding now seemed unavoidable. He couldn't stay. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine when the foundation of his life had been torn apart. His mind raced as he considered his options. How would he explain this to Ben and Lily? How would he navigate the practicalities of a divorce, of splitting their lives into pieces? A few minutes later he stood up, made his way to the study and pushed open the door. Kimberly was sitting at her desk, her face pale and tired. Gregory had long since left, but the tension in the room lingered. Kimberly didn't look up as he entered, her eyes focused on the papers in front of her. She was trying to act normal, but Samuel could see the cracks in her facade. Samuel, I know you're angry, Kimberly said quietly, her voice strained. But I never wanted to hurt you. No, Samuel interrupted, his voice sharp. You don't get to make excuses now, Kimberly. I don't want to hear it. He felt his voice falter, but he couldn't stop it. I heard it with my own ears. I heard the way you laughed. I heard him. Kimberly's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything for a moment. She seemed to be searching for the right words, but Samuel knew there was nothing she could say that would make things better. Samuel, please, Kimberly began, standing up from the desk. It wasn't like that. It's just that things have been so hard between us. I didn't know how to fix it, and Gregory, he just came into my life at a time when I was feeling so lost. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, but... Stop, Samuel said, holding up a hand. I don't want to hear it anymore. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't bear to hear her explanations, her apologies. The damage was done. Kimberly stood there, her lips trembling. What are we going to do now? She asked softly. Samuel, I still love you. We can fix this. We can. "No, Kimberly," Samuel said, his voice cold. "You don't love me. If you did, this never would have happened." The words stung, but they were the truth. Samuel knew now that their marriage was beyond saving. He couldn't rebuild what had been destroyed, not after everything that had happened. The trust was gone. The foundation was gone. And so was he. He turned and walked out of the study, his heart heavy with the finality of it all. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Samuel spent the rest of the evening in a daze, trying to process the reality of what had happened. By the time he went to bed, it was clear that the life he had known was over. But amidst the heartbreak, he felt a sense of clarity. The next steps were inevitable. He would file for divorce and he would fight for full custody of Ben and Lily. No matter how much he loved Kimberly, he could never forgive her for what she had done. In the days that followed, Samuel focused on what mattered most: his children. They were the reason he had to keep going, the reason he had to find a way forward. He would protect them, love them, and give them the life they deserved. He didn't know how he would navigate the coming months, how he would face the challenges of a divorce, the legal battles, or the emotional toll of it all. But one thing was certain: he would not let Kimberly's betrayal define him. He would not let it destroy him. He had to move on for himself and for his children. The days following Samuel's confrontation with Kimberly felt like a blur. He moved through the motions of daily life, dealing with the immediate aftermath of the betrayal, but his mind was consumed with one thought. He had to protect his children. The anger, the heartbreak, it all faded into the background when he thought about Ben and Lily. They deserved a life of stability, a life where they didn't have to bear the weight of their parents' mistakes. The first few nights after the confrontation, Samuel stayed in the guest bedroom, unable to face the bed he had shared with Kimberly for so many years. His mind would race each time he tried to sleep, and he'd find himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past few days over and over again. He couldn't escape the images of Kimberly and Gregory, or the feeling of betrayal that clung to him like a second skin. But he knew he couldn't allow himself to get lost in it. He had to keep moving forward. Over the next few weeks, Samuel filed for divorce, a decision that felt both right and gut-wrenching at the same time. He knew there was no turning back. The trust between him and Kimberly had been irrevocably shattered, and no amount of time or apologies would fix what had been broken. He wanted a clean break for himself and for his children. The battle for custody was inevitable, but Samuel was determined to fight for full custody of Ben and Lily. He knew Kimberly would try to fight him, but he wasn't going to back down. His children were his priority now. The legal proceedings were grueling, and Samuel often found himself overwhelmed by the constant reminders of the life he was leaving behind. He had to deal with lawyers, paperwork, and the unsettling truth that his entire world was about to change. But amid all the chaos, he found solace in the moments he spent with Ben and Lily. He made sure to take them to school every morning, help them with their homework, and tuck them into bed at night. He was there for them in a way he hadn't been in months, and that made all the difference. As the weeks passed, Samuel started to regain his sense of purpose. He threw himself back into his work, taking on new projects and pushing his design firm to new heights. The success of his business had always been a source of pride for him, and now it became his anchor. The creative process gave him something to focus on, something to pour his energy into. He found himself more driven than ever, and with each new project he felt a sense of accomplishment that had been absent for far too long. One day, after a particularly long meeting with a new client, Samuel received a call from his lawyer. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, and it was time to finalize the custody agreement. Samuel felt a pang of anxiety in his chest, but he reminded himself that this was what he had to do for Ben and Lily. He couldn't let the past dictate their future. The following week, Samuel sat in a courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. Kimberly sat across from him, her face a mask of quiet determination. She was fighting for joint custody, but Samuel wasn't going to settle for anything less than full custody. The judge asked both of them to explain why they believed they should have custody of the children, and Samuel spoke from the heart. He talked about his love for his children, his commitment to providing them with a stable, nurturing environment, and his desire to protect them from the emotional turmoil of the situation. Kimberly, for her part, spoke about her love for Ben and Lily as well, but Samuel could hear the shakiness in her voice. She wasn't as convincing as she had been in the past. Her argument was weakened by the betrayal, the affair that had shattered their trust. Samuel knew that no matter how much she tried to explain herself, the truth was that she had already lost their trust. And she had lost Samuel too. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally rendered a decision. Samuel was granted full custody of Ben and Lily. It was a bittersweet victory, but it was the right one. He couldn't change the past, but he could control their future. He would be the one to guide them through this difficult time, to give them the love and security they needed to heal. As the months went by, Samuel settled into his new life. He became more attuned to the needs of Ben and Lily, making sure to keep their routines consistent and providing them with the support they needed to adjust to the changes in their lives. He took them on trips, spent weekends together, and created new memories that would help them move forward. For the first time in a long time, Samuel began to feel a sense of peace. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He had found his footing again, and he was determined to build a future that was defined by love, not betrayal. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the challenge. His business continued to flourish, and Samuel found himself gaining more high-profile clients, each project adding to his reputation as one of the best interior designers in the city. The recognition felt good, but it wasn't just about the accolades. It was about proving to himself that he could succeed, that he could rise above the pain and come out stronger. One evening, as he was working late on a design proposal, Samuel received a message from his lawyer. It was a reminder about his upcoming meeting with Kimberly to finalize the last details of their divorce settlement. Samuel took a deep breath, setting his pen down. There would be no more battles. No more fighting. The past was behind him. He knew he had done the right thing by focusing on his children and his career. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, and though the scars of the past would always be there, they no longer held him back. Samuel had found a new beginning, one that was built on his own strength and resilience. He had learned that sometimes, the most painful experiences could lead to the most transformative ones. And with that, Samuel knew that the future was his to shape. For the first time in a long while, he felt free. Free to be the father, the man, and the person he had always wanted to be.